Well, good morning. Since the last time we spoke, fall officially arrived on the calendar. If we look around, there are a lot of signs that the days of summer are behind us. This morning, our focus is on health care. A healthy immune system defends the body against disease. But if the immune system malfunctions, it can cause serious, even life-threatening problems. We'll learn more about that threat starting right now.
From TV6, this is The Ryan Report. Here's your host, Don Ryan.
Dr. Susan Manzi is professor of medicine and chair of the Medicine Institute at Allegheny Health Network in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She founded the Lupus Center of Excellence as a new model for integrated patient care and has provided care for patients from around the world who travel to Pittsburgh because of her reputation in diagnosis and management. Since joining the Allegheny Health Network in 2010, Dr. Manzi has expanded this highly successful model of chronic disease management to patients with other autoimmune diseases by creating the Allegheny Health Network Autoimmunity Institute. She's in Marquette to be one of the keynote speakers at a symposium at Northern Michigan University. Pleased to welcome Dr. Manzi to our show. Welcome.
Thank you, Don.
Nice to have you with us. I'd like to have our guests our audience get to know our guests a little bit. So, as I did some research, I believe you grew up in a very small town.
I did, in Crabtree, Pennsylvania, which was a small coal mining town in western Pennsylvania.
Okay. And it looks like family was a big influence early in your life.
Very big influence. My grandparents were first-generation Italian immigrants, and my grandfather was in the coal mines, and large, extended Italian family, Italian Catholic family.
And so that can be a lot of fun, too.
Yes, yes, it can be.
And I think you began your educational career at Notre Dame, perhaps not knowing exactly where you were going in the beginning.
That's correct. Went to University of Notre Dame, didn't know I wanted to be a physician, and then as time went on, I thought it seemed like the career that was a good fit for me, and I made the right choice.
So how did you finish up that education then?
So I went from Notre Dame to University of Pittsburgh, where I got my MD, and then I did my training in internal medicine at Duke University, and then came back to University of Pittsburgh to train in rheumatology.
Okay. At what point did you decide you were going to become involved with the autoimmune diseases? And of course, rheumatoid arthritis is one of those.
Yes, exactly. So during medical school, I was very intrigued by the immune system. It seemed like this complex organ system that people didn't fully appreciate how important it was. And then when I was in my training, I recognized that very young, predominantly women, can be impacted by autoimmune disease, and lupus became my passion because that was a disease was fatal, potentially fatal, and impacted young women my own age. And I thought, I've got to dedicate my life to this because I should not see these young women dying from this disease. So, and from that point on, that's all I've been focused on.
Let's back up a minute just to make sure our audience is with us. Define autoimmune diseases for us.
Yeah, so autoimmunity is an interesting concept. You know your immune system is there to protect you against invaders that don't belong in your body, viruses, bacteria. But the challenge your immune system has is to fight those invaders without harming self. So I liken it to, an army out there fighting the enemy, and everyone's running around. How do you distinguish the enemy from your ally? And sometimes the immune system gets it right in most people, but in some people it misses its mark, and it starts to attack self. Looking at it as if it were a foreign invader, because the immune system is not regulated. And a lot of that's determined by your genetics. And you just get unlucky sometimes.
So we don't really know why it happens. It just happens?
Yeah, well, we're learning more. So we know that genetics is important. We see a lot of family members that have autoimmunity within their family tree. But what we realize is the genetics or your genes are not quite enough. There has to be a trigger then that turns it on. And sometimes that trigger can be an environmental factor. So for example, sunlight can actually trigger onset of lupus, believe it or not, or certain toxins or things that are in the environment. We also know that your gender makes a difference because a lot of these diseases are predominantly women, a lot more than men, And we also know lifestyle makes a difference. So for example, cigarette smoking has been tightly linked to onset of rheumatoid arthritis.
Really?
So it's all these factors come together if you've got the right genetic background.
And of course, a person probably isn't diagnosed with autoimmune disease. They're diagnosed with something more specific.
Exactly, exactly. And the key is detecting it early, which sometimes it's not because they're not always easy to diagnose, and getting treatment started as soon as possible. Because as I said, these diseases can be devastating.
And there are almost countless autoimmune diseases, aren't there?
Yes, I mean, the estimate's over 100, 50 million people in the United States. And a lot of times people know that what they have, but they don't connect it to autoimmunity. So for example, thyroid, right? A low thyroid, hypothyroidism can be autoimmune. It's called Hashimoto's. So there's a lot of people out there with taking medicine for their thyroid, but they don't recognize it as an autoimmune disease.
Okay. And is it difficult to diagnose these diseases?
Some are difficult and some are easy. So an easy one would be type 1 diabetes, right? That's where the immune system targets cells of the pancreas. That's where the insulin is made. When that happens, you can develop type 1 diabetes. That's relatively easy to diagnose because you measure your blood sugar level, right? Or psoriasis, you can see it on your skin, which is an autoimmune disease. But then you get to diseases that are rare, one called relapsing polychondritis. Immune system targets the cartilage. Your ears, your nose can cause inflammation and redness. That can be overlooked, but then there can be devastating consequences because you have cartilage in your breathing tube. And if it targets there, you can have difficulty breathing. That can be a tough one, and a lot of people don't know about that one. Lupus is the same, very mysterious in how it presents, and if you don't think of it, you often can't diagnose it.
Okay. Got some more questions for you. We'll get to those in a couple of minutes. Back with more on the Ryan Report after we take this break. I guess this morning is Dr. Susan Manzi. We're talking with her about autoimmune diseases. She's here to speak to a symposium at Northern Michigan University. Just as we were going to a break, you mentioned polychondritis. I know that you do have a segment in this symposium on that.
Yes, yes. Relapsing polychondritis. There are a group of advocates, Mike Lynn and Nancy Lynn, who actually graduated from the nursing school here at NMU, Nancy, and her brother Mike, as well as some other folks around here, David and Kathy Bammert, are part of a race for relapsing polychondritis team that's trying to increase awareness and advocacy for relapsing polychondritis. Because I would guess right now most of your viewers have never heard of that.
I had never heard of it
exactly.
until I started preparing for this.
And so hence they are out and about trying to raise awareness, and they're using auto racing as the race for relapsing polychondritis as a vehicle, if you will. I guess that's kind of a play on words, but as a vehicle to get out into the United States and make people aware of the disease, because it can be devastating and potentially fatal.
Well, and you were mentioning earlier that it can affect different parts of the body?
Yes, it targets cartilage, which is what makes it so interesting and unusual. And if you start thinking about places in your body where you have cartilage, as I mentioned, ears, nose, and the most concerning is the breathing tube or the trachea. And when it attacks that, the trachea can actually collapse, and so you can't get air in or out. And your joints, every joint in your body has cartilage. So you can have joint pain and you can have fatigue, and it can be problematic.
You were mentioning earlier you've really focused on lupus and kind of explained why, but are we making progress in dealing with these diseases? You
know, we're making progress, yes, and I think the future is bright, but not as fast as I would like. And you know, it's interesting because when you think about your immune system, we always talk about autoimmunity. It's actually overactive and unregulated, but we know a lot about what happens when you don't have an immune system, like HIV, right? And think about HIV. In the 1980s, people died with HIV.
Right.
Now, in current years, people live with HIV and they're actually taking one medication and doing quite well. How did that happen? It happened because of advocacy, right? It was the patients and everybody coming together to say, we need to do something. So the National Institutes of Health, the Food and Drug Administration said, let's cure this. And they did it. We need that for autoimmunity. You know, we need to get up there and say we need better treatments, we need earlier diagnosis, and advocacy is so important because I don't think people realize how loud their voices can be. So what I've noticed is that there's been a lot of advocacy for lupus. The Lupus Foundation of America has led that. And what's happened now is we have about 30 companies making treatments for lupus for the first time.
I was going to say, when you talk about advocacy, can you do it for the whole autoimmune disease category, or do you really have to focus on the individuals to get that kind of attention?
I think you could do both. I think it's a really good question. I think you can do both. You want to, because when you do it for all of autoimmunity, the numbers are big, and that gets the attention of people. Sometimes when it's a rare disease, it's hard to get people's attention because it doesn't impact as many people. So if you can go in big with autoimmunity and then start kind of whittling down to look at this and look at that. And the other thing that's interesting is if you can solve for one autoimmune disease, you could solve for maybe more than one because they share different pathways, you know, they share similarities. And in fact, some of the treatments that are now being used, for example, for psoriasis are also effective for rheumatoid arthritis and Crohn's disease, inflammatory bowel disease. So we're sharing treatments.
It's just such a big subject, you know, and speaking of awareness, you know, Alzheimer's gets a lot of attention,
Yes.
Cancer, heart disease. Where does autoimmunity fit into all that?
Way down,
Well,
way down, and it's unfortunate. And you know, we always say, does it take a celebrity to come forward? You know, what does it take to get people to recognize this? I mean, there's a lot of people suffering from autoimmune diseases, so we really need to figure out a way to get attention and to get more people focused on finding a cure.
Okay. We'll talk some more about it in just a couple of minutes. Once again, let's take a break. We'll be back 2 minutes from now. Again, our guest this morning is Dr. Susan Manzi. Dealing with the autoimmune diseases, can we provide help for people? Is that mainly what we're doing at this point?
Absolutely. First, it's increasing awareness. Secondly, I'm a big believer that the more educated people are about their own conditions, the more they can advocate for themselves. Because there are doctors out there that may not know as much as the patients know about their disease. And I always say you need to ask questions, you need to be informed, and you need to push for the things that you need. So to me, you got to get down into the grassroots and educate doctors, but also the patients.
Is it difficult to find doctors in many communities that would have the knowledge to deal with these issues?
Sometimes it is, which is why we created the Autoimmunity Institute at Allegheny Health Network. We found that people search for years to find anybody that understands the complexity of the disease, how to diagnose it, how to treat it. And we've also found that most people, or I shouldn't say most, but many people that have one autoimmune condition have a second one as well. And so they need multiple specialists to manage them. And so what we did was brought all the specialists together. We have 17 different specialties practicing under one roof to manage the greater than 100 autoimmune diseases. So we communicate, we talk to each other, and it's just an environment to nurture.
Has most of the research now been directed toward providing relief or finding an answer?
Both. I think one is to figure out why we get it, because if you can figure out why, you can probably develop a treatment.
Right.
Second is to diagnose, because some are difficult to diagnose. There's no blood test that tells you you have lupus. It requires expertise. Your symptoms, your physical exam, and a few blood tests can help, but nothing can be absolute. So we want to get better diagnostic tools out there. And third, better treatments.
In the introduction I mentioned, people are coming from around the world to see you. That must be very satisfying and gratifying.
It really is. I mean, in some ways it's gratifying. In other ways, it hurts to know that there aren't enough physicians out there with the expertise needed to manage these patients, and so we have to improve that as well.
I'm not certain here. I'm just going to tell you what I think. It seems to me that the most common might be rheumatoid arthritis, especially among our viewers.
That's a very common one, absolutely, much more common than lupus. Multiple sclerosis is also autoimmune, and so there are, and autoimmune thyroid is probably the most common.
Okay.
But rheumatoid arthritis, absolutely.
Why do you come to symposiums like this to present this story?
Because I'm out there trying to spread the word, and I'm going to be talking, or I did speak to the nursing students, right? So it's Northern Michigan University Nursing School has sponsored this, and look how many people you can touch. And we're also inviting the public as well. So people, the healthcare clinicians and providers, just to get the word out and educate about autoimmunity.
And how successful are we now? Are we getting the word out more?
I think we are. You know, I remember saying about 10 years ago, I used to walk into a room and say, how many people here have heard of lupus? And there may be 2 hands go up. Now when I go in a room, I say, how many people have heard of lupus? Almost everyone's hand goes up. But when I say, what is it? No one's hand goes up, right?
Probably nobody says an autoimmune disease.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah. So. How much success have we had in dealing with lupus, from your perspective? I
think we're getting there. As I said, we've had our first new drug approved for lupus in 50 years in 2011. So we had a 50-year drought of no new treatments for lupus, and then in 2011 we had our first. And now there's 30 new drugs in the pipeline and a few that look promising. So we're speeding up.
You've been at this now for some time. How do you look back on your career and what's been accomplished and what might we find in the future?
Well, you know, the first thing I say is I thank God that I went into this profession, because I get up every day and I love what I do. I'm never content, because I think, you know, my Dr. Joe Ahern is my partner in trying to cure lupus, and we say every day that we want to put ourselves out of business. So until I can put myself out of business, we're going to keep going.
Well, that's great. We have people like you who are so committed to.
Thank you.
Committed to what you're doing.
Thank you very much.
And we need a lot more people like that.
Thanks
for coming in this morning.
Thank
to
you
tell
for
us
having
your story.
me.
We'll be back with more on today's Ryan Report after we take a break. Well, the owners of the Marquette Mall have announced the building will be torn down. The chain link fence is already in place. Some demolition has started, and it won't be long before the structure will be just a memory. The building will be gone, and for a lot of people, many memories will disappear as well. You know, in its day, the Marquette Mall was a very exciting place. It was fun to visit. It was the first mall in Marquette and one of the first in Upper Michigan. Like the Delta Plaza Mall in Escanaba, it opened in the early 70s. It was packed with stores, restaurants, and even a movie theater. The mall was anchored by the Woolworth store, one of the largest retail chains in the country at that time, and by Angeli's, a supermarket that led the way as a modern place for grocery shopping. The mall had a fountain and a gathering place for sitting with friends as they took a break from shopping. The failure of malls is not a new story. Malls are closing all over the country. But the thought of the building completely disappearing really tugs at the heartstrings for many people. For a mall is not just a building, it's a place with many memories. Looking at Facebook, I can see so many people who have fond remembrances from the Marquette Mall. Eating at the Onion Crock or Big Boy, grabbing an ice cream cone at Gordy's Patio, shopping at a variety of stores, meeting a boyfriend or girlfriend, and sitting around the fountain or taking in a movie. Many also remember working at places in the mall as well. You know, a lot of people blame the internet and online shopping as places like Amazon for the failure of the malls and other retailers? Personally, I'm not so sure. As I think about it, I don't believe it's the stores that have fostered the change. I think people, the shoppers, have changed. Perhaps not you and I, but society today is looking for something different. A lot of people today don't seem to be interested in going to a mall and wandering from store to store to see what they have to offer. They don't want to meet friends at the mall for coffee or lunch and some shopping. I guess we could say they want to power shop. They want what they want and they want to buy it and move on to something else in their busy day. Shopping went from being a form of recreation to a chore that so many want to get off their to-do list. I guess we shouldn't be surprised. There are changes occurring as we live when only a place so many people get, the only time people get to see their friends is on Facebook. And texting has replaced face-to-face conversation as the primary means of communication. In the end, it's like other aspects of life. We're always going somewhere and doing something. And too often, we're in a hurry to get there. Not only don't we stop to smell the roses, sometimes we don't even notice the flowers are there. I'll be back in a minute. Before we wrap it up this morning, let me remind you can get the latest news anytime at uppermichigansource.com. You can also watch this show at that same address. Thanks to Dr. Susan Manzi for joining us this morning to provide some insights into the challenging matter of autoimmune diseases. And thank you for tuning in. Hope to see you again next Sunday morning.